Okay, so if you're missing this lecture, go back and watch the Monsters University progression reel to see what we're talking about right now. So you'll see in here, all of this really has is our models, our basic camera motion, and any basic character motion that we're going to need, okay? So for you, that could be your character just in the T-pose, in the A-pose, whatever, just sliding around the scene, right? This is kind of the 3D version of our animatic. This allows us to get a scene ready where we can start animating without having to prep a whole bunch of stuff, right? This is basically, you're doing all of that prep up front. Anybody ever worked fast food? If you worked in like a fast food restaurant? Yeah. So if somebody orders a burger from Burger King, they don't go in the back and get one patty and start cooking that patty and then go get a tomato and slice one tomato off of it and put it, right? They prep all of that stuff together. That way when it's time to start making the burgers, they have a bucket of tomatoes, right? And they start putting them on there. That's what layout is we're doing our early 3D work, so once we get to the animation pass, we can focus on how we make things move, right? So all we really need to know is these characters sliding around. Mike maybe flips upside down, that one's carrying a hat, right? Sully is chasing after them, right? So we can, again, like similar to with the animatic, you're needing your information about your environment, information about your character, information about your camera. Okay, those three things. We can go back and see other Pixar progression reels. There's actually a lot of really good ones. The Brave progression reel sort of shows us a lot of this as well. Why is everything... We'll just ignore politics for the next 30 seconds and then move on and watch our video. How about that? Are we done? Okay, here we go. So this is layout. I just realized I don't have WebEx on, so I'm going to go ahead and start broadcasting via WebEx as well if you want to watch it that way or want to sort of follow along that way. So again, watching the layout pass, we see simple stuff like the character running across this field, jump onto a horse, right? That is probably, more posing information. Okay, there we go. So I'm sharing via WebEx if you're wanting to follow along. That's probably more posing information than you need. It also may be more action than any of your characters take. So if your character is walking from one side of the scene to the other, it may just be your character just slides across the scene at an appropriate timing, right? But it allows you to set your camera up, it allows you to set up any environments, any of your framing, any of that stuff that you need, okay? Now I know what most of you are probably thinking right now is that you're not ready to do that yet, right? You're like, I'm still modeling stuff, I don't have my scene ready, I can't do that yet. This is actually the perfect time to do it. This is the time you should be doing it. So I'm going to sort of switch from talking about doing layout and showing you the correct way to structure your project, particularly the Maya parts of this project, okay? So once because I will say, once you've done your layout pass, you can pretty much play blast your entire movie, and you're just a little bit closer to the finished version of it, right? And then from there, you just animate each of your shots and you re-render them or you play blast them again, right, until you get the final thing. So I'm going to show you how to structure your project. I'm going to make a new project folder. So File, Project Window. I'm just going to do this on my desktop. And we'll call this example project, accept. And you'll see that if I go to open a scene, it immediately takes me to my my scenes folder, right? So this is how you should probably be structuring your own project. I'm going to go ahead and model my environment. This is something took you weeks to do. I'm going to do it in like 15 seconds. All right. Model a couple of buildings. Right. Let's say this is maybe not buildings. Maybe these are like pillars or something. Okay, there we go. This is my environment, okay? So you're probably working on something similar, right? You're like, this is where all of your scenes are going to take place, right? In my folder, I'm just going to go ahead and save this file. File, save scene as, and then I usually create a folder in here just to keep my environment separate from my characters and all that stuff. And you'll see why here in a minute. So we'll call this E&B environment, right? And I'll call this MOD-ENB. So this is my model of my environment, okay? Save as. I'm going to create a new file, file, new scene. Okay, I'm going to make my character. It's going to be the bestest character in the history of characters. Magnum opus. Okay, so this is my character for my scene. I spent weeks and weeks on my character, right? And I'm going to go ahead and save this on in another folder as well. File, save scene as. Right? Instead of saving it in my environments folder, I'll go ahead and create too far back. A new folder, care, and I'll save this MOD-. So it's model of my character, right? Now, this is, if you have other elements, let's say you have two characters or you have like a very specific object that's going to be doing some things, right? Yours may not all just be one character in one environment. We have, if there's like key models that the character interacts with, key props, maybe you would save those out as separate pieces as well. But the reason we do this is we're going to combine this into a new scene, okay? So I'm just going to do a new scene. This scene is completely empty right now, right? Nothing in here. If you look in your outliner, there's nothing. I feel like I'm doing a magic trick. There's nothing up my sleeve right now. So I'm going to go to File and save this scene as a layout file, okay? Different people do this differently. I usually do Anim, and I just do everything under Anim because I know immediately after layout, I'll go to Anim. But we can do layout or whatever you want to call it, right? And I'll call this layout.0001.mb, right? And hit save as. Now I basically just saved an empty Maya file, right? There's nothing in here. What I'm going to do is instead of importing all of my elements in here, I'm going to reference them in. Now, if you've already combined everything, it's okay. This is still doable without much headache, right? But I'm going to go File, Create Reference. And when we say the word reference, we usually are talking about like visual reference, right? Like we brought in image references to see how to model a tractor or whatever, a model, right? In this case, we're using it in like the way you would use reference, like you're referring to something, right? You have to list your references at the end of a paper, right? And so really what that means is all of that subject matter came into your paper through these references, right? That's the same thing we're doing here. Instead of importing those files and all of those meshes living in one file, we're going to leave them in their other files. We're just going to reference them in, right? So if I go here to my environment and I choose my model of my environment and hit reference, it's going to bring it in. And it looks like I imported it or opened it, right? But I didn't. And you can tell this because on the actual models here, you see this little blue diamond. That means that any changes I make to this model in here only affect it in this file, right? And there are certain things I can't do to it, right? I don't know if I can or not. Can I? I guess I can. But there are certain things like trying to delete it. I can't delete that object. Okay. So what's really happening here is this model that I'm seeing. It's kind of like there's an invisible version of Maya open, and it's pulling that model, that .md file, it's pulling all that information from it into my empty file here, right? So these models don't really exist in here. They're being referenced in from a separate Maya file. Does that make sense? Maybe? Okay, let's keep trying here. So I'm going to reference in a character. I'll show you, like, if I go to File, Reference Editor, this is where all of my references live, right? And if I just uncheck this, it all goes away, right? I'm no longer even looking at that file, and I bring it back in, right? So I can create a new reference from here too. It's under File, Create Reference, or this button right here will do it as well, right? And so I can bring in my model from here. Right? Go to my character model, reference, and there he is, best model in the world, hanging out right there in the middle of my environment. Right? And I can animate this model around. Right? I can do whatever I want to with it. But really, all of this information is still coming from that other file. Right? And I can turn this on or off anytime I want to. In fact, I can bring in a new version of this as well. I can bring in a second character if I wanted to. Right? And so basically, I didn't import two versions of the character. I'm referencing in that Maya file with the character in it twice. Right? It's the same file. It's looking at mod-char .md, right? So if I go ahead and save this, I'm saving the layout file. So I go File, Increment and Save. So I have Layout 02. File, New Scene. So let's go look at those. On my desktop, example projects, scenes. I have my character file, 52 kilobytes, right? My environment file, 72 kilobytes. My layout file, which has both of them in it, is smaller than either of them, right? Because there's actually nothing in that file except a little note that says, go look at those other two Maya files, right? Which means if I go open up one of those other two Maya files and make changes to it, right? Let's open my character scene. Right? If I were to make this character's head bigger, maybe make its arms longer, even add a new element, right? Maybe I am going to add a hat. Yeah. And then I save over this, file, save scene. Now usually I wouldn't encourage you to save over this. What I do is I keep sort of the reference file, like mod-char, and I save over that periodically, but while I'm working, I have these working files that I'm iterating and saving, or incrementing and saving. So once I've saved this though, I could also go back to my environment, right? And maybe in my environment, I decide I want this world to be bigger, right? I want to duplicate that and maybe make us a wall back here so I can't see beyond the end of the world, right? And I go ahead and save over my environment file. If I go back to my my layout file here and open it, all of those updates should have came in. Don't know why that one didn't. Let's delete that. All right, I don't know why it didn't come in with this guy. I'll have to look in that. Maybe it's just because he's in there twice. So let's just go ahead and remove that one. But the updates to the character came in, the updates to the environment came in, right? Now hopefully you can see the benefit of this. If you have 30 different shots and 30 different Maya files, and the director comes to you, or even you're looking at it and you say, you know what, I need to fix that thing in the background. If you are not using this, you have to go fix 30 different files, right? If you are using this, you fix one, and it updates on all of them. I worked with a guy in the past who was one of the rigging artists, and he would reference in different parts of the rig. He would have a Maya file for the finger rig. He would have a Maya file for the arm rig, a Maya file for the torso rig. And he would reference all of those into a master rig file to put together a single character, and he would reference all of that and the mesh into another file where he skinned it, and then we would reference that file in to animate on it, right? And that meant if I contacted him later and said, hey, you know what, that pinky rig isn't working right, he would go in and he would fix the pinky rig file, and it would update on every character in the whole entire game. Right? Every character got a new version of that rig. This is how you break the linear dependency in this pipeline. Like if you don't have to be finished with everything to move on to the next step, right? Now, hopefully this is making sense. This means you can get a prototype. This means you can get your layout out. Like you all can be done with your layout before the end of the day today. And that means all you have to do is start updating those Maya files, and it updates in your scene every time. And then you're done, right? Eventually, like you've updated so many times that the file is done. So this is how I would strongly encourage you to work. Another tool you're going to hopefully find beneficial is allows you to manage the timeline. So this is a hard one. This is really going to be project by project. Some of you are going to have a different environment for every shot, or something's going to be different for almost every shot, right? And then some of you, your entire animation is in one file, or in one room, right? Your character is in one room throughout the entire thing, right? And so you have a hard decision here of what are you going to have a different Maya file for each shot that you're making, or are you going to have one Maya file that has all of your animation in it, just in different spots of the timeline? If your environment is not changing a lot, I would probably, just for ease of access, recommend doing it in one file. Just please don't keep resaving over the same file. Keep incrementing and saving. But let me show you like what I'm talking about. Let's say for from frames 1 to 20, right? I have the shot where the character runs from here over to here, right? So that's that's 1 through 30, right? Oh, stupid auto key. There we go. So now my character runs from there, right? And maybe after he gets here, I have another shot where this thing falls over, right? And that's going to happen from frame 60 to 80, right? Close enough. And then later I have another shot from 100 to 120 where this character flies away, right? So 100 to 120, character flies away, right? So I have all these different things that happen in these different parts of the timeline. We can manage that and focus in on certain parts of the timeline with just a click of the button, but the tool is not going to sound very intuitive. If we go to File, it's under Game Exporter. So half of you or most of you are probably not planning on rendering this in a game engine. If you are, that's cool. There's a lot of neat stuff we can do in there. But the Game Exporter is usually used so you can animate multiple animations into a game engine. We're going to use it for a different thing though. If you go over here to Animation Clips, it allows us to save out clips of our timeline. Right? So my clip number 1, I'll call this shot 1, and I want it to be from frame 1 to 30. So I just type 30 in there. Right? And then shot number 2 was from 60 to 80, so I'll add that. Shot 2, 60 to 80. And then shot 3 was, what was it, 100 to 120, right? So this saves with your Maya file. So if I close this down and go open it back up, it's still in there, right? But the cool part about that is I can click this button and then it will automatically frame up frames 1 through 30, automatically frame up 60 through 80, 100 to 120, right? And if I hit the play button, it'll automatically play back that section. Like it'll just go to it and start playing it, right? So I use this to save my shots, right? I wouldn't rely on it entirely. I usually also make a spreadsheet that that gives me a list of like what my frames are, which camera I'm rendering from. I usually make that as well just for redundancy in case something happens to my file, this gets corrupted or whatever. But in terms of ease of access, being able to jump back and forth to different animation clips, this is a really beneficial tool. Okay, questions, comments? Okay, I strongly encourage you to use referencing on this. If you're already like in the place where you have like an entire scene built, it's really not that hard. You would just export out you would save a version of your file where you've deleted all of your character stuff and you just have your environment. And then you'd save a version of your file where you've deleted all of your environment stuff and you just have your character. We could do a little cleanup on it. But this will allow you to make changes to those things later, right? Without having to update every scene. Things as little as, let's say you start rendering and you realize that your character's forehead is too glossy, right? They look too shiny. You can go change that in like 10 seconds in your reference file, and it fixes it in all of your renders, right? When you start rendering, it'll fix it in all of them. Okay, any questions about any of this? Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is completely different, like completely different part of the process entirely. You all are making models, and I wanted to show you some basics of using Substance Painter to get you some materials on that. How many of you have used Substance before? Okay, cool. I'm assuming that meant Marty taught it to you, which means you probably already know it better than I do. Because, no. It's a complicated program. I'm going to go through the basics of it. Recognize that with any of this, like you have like a big portion of this class is allotted for you to be doing like personal research on this, right? Everybody's project is different. And so some of this stuff may mean like you have a very specific way you want a material to look. You may have to do some like independent research to figure that out. I'm more than happy to help you with it, but what I'm going to start working with, I've actually given you all a copy of it if you want to use it. So if you go up to ETSU E3, under DIGM classes, Greg, 3D animation, resources, there's this rocket2.mb, which would imply that it's better than rocket1.mb. I'm going to go ahead and copy this onto my computer here just so I can use it. And I'm just going to go ahead and open that scene just so you can see what it is. There we go. So a very simple rocket, right? Before you go into Substance, the first thing you need to make sure is that your object has some reasonable UVs. Okay, mine are not great, but they're not terrible. Windows, modeling editor, we go to my UV editor. And you'll see that basically what I have is this section here is the underside of the rocket. Right. This section is the fuselage, I guess. This section is like the nose, and then each of these is the little wing tail fin things, right? Okay. All we need is a mesh. We're going to send this into Substance using FBX or OBJ. So File, Export Selection. I have it selected. Right? I'm going to choose my options box. I usually use FBX, but both of these will work, I think. FBX export. FBX will transfer between most of the 3D packages and is usually the format that most game engines recognize as well. OBX is a little bit older and is usually used for stuff like 3D printing. CAD uses a lot more OBX, or OBJ, I'm sorry. So FBX is what I'm going to go for. Export selected. I'm just going to go ahead and put this on my desktop. I'll call it Rocket for Substance. There we go. Hit export. And it put it here somewhere. There it is. Rocket for Substance. Okay. So let's open up Substance Painter. SUB. There it is. Substance Painter. I want to open up Photoshop too, just so I can use this for illustration purposes. So it's going to give me this error. I'm going to say continue anyway, because I need it. No, I do not want to update, and just go ahead and hit close. There we go. So the first thing we're going to do is sort of import this in. If you go to File and start looking for import, it's going to bring in this import resources. That's not what you want. What we're actually going to do is create a new Substance file, right? So we go File, New. We have to first select the template for our materials. I'm going to choose PBR Metallic Roughness Algorithmic. That's because that's how Arnold works as well, right? Arnold has a metallic setting and a roughness setting, and it's a physically based renderer. If you're planning on kicking this out to a game engine, there's a preset in there for Unreal, there's a preset for Unity, and you can actually make your own presets as well, but this is the template that I usually go for. It works pretty well. You'll notice in this, it gives me the option to import a mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and select my mesh, just have it on my desktop, Rocket for Substance, hit open. And that's way too small of a resolution for my material. Go up at least to 2048. If you're doing a character, you may even want to go up higher than that. But right now, 2048 will do for me. And hit OK. And so this is what we're going to get in Substance. Now, if you think about every other way you've ever made a texture or ever made a material in Maya, you've made the maps individually, and then you've taken those in to an Arnold material and sort of piped those in and tried to get them to give you the right result inside of Maya, right? And so it's a lot of like, this is what the specular map should look like. This is what the roughness map should look like. And it's really hard to, like, you almost have to imagine it and then try it and then go see if that works. And then when it doesn't work, go back and try to fix it. And that's just a pain in the butt, when really what you're trying to get is a material, not a texture, right? Texture maps are just how we drive materials. So why substance is important, or why substance works so well, is you're not painting textures in here. You're painting the entire material, right? You're creating an entire material in here, not just a single map. And then once you get it to look the way you want it to in substance, substance will separate that out for you and export out the maps you need to make it look like that in Maya too, right? So, if you've never used Substance before, you'll see that it has a lot of similarities to multiple programs. I can hold Alt and kind of tumble around, right? Over here, it's starting to look a little bit more like Photoshop. I have the ability to scroll down here, choose a different color, like this base color. I can choose red, right? I can go up here and I can start painting on my object, right? I have the option to change the size of my brush, right? And I can say, yeah, Greg. So, and you can see that even though I went right across my seam there, it sort of figured out where I wanted it to be, right? Like, paint across that, and it just kind of works, right? It's because I'm painting in this 3D space. Right? So let's try that again. So I'm painting 3D space. You can kind of see that it's painting on both the upper side and the lower side of this, right? Now, there's a lot of manual painting things we can do, but right now, I'm going to go back and show you, like, a lot of this is going to work just like in Photoshop. Like, even though I have this layer here, I have the option to turn down my opacity on that layer. I have the option to set this to multiply instead of, or overlay or something like that, right? And I can create new layers and do multiple layers of stuff. Right now, all I'm really painting is my color map. I can also paint height. Like if I wanted to do height, change my brush size, you'll see that when I paint it, it looks like it's raising the material as well, right? Or I can paint, maybe I take my color out of this completely, like I uncheck color, actually uncheck everything except maybe roughness, right? And you'll see that I can paint the gloss off of this, right? I can make that section less glossy. Okay. I'm not going to do any of that though. I'm going to delete that layer, create a new one, just so I have something on there. Now, the cool part about Substance is that we can use a lot of these preset materials and then just alter or work with those, right? So I can just drag this plastic gloss material over here into my layers, drag it on top. And so now my entire object is this blue gloss material, right? So if I have this entirely like blue gloss object, like that's great, but like I want multiple materials on here. And so that's where this is, this gets a little bit more complicated, right? Let's say I wanted part of this to be made out of mortar, right? So I drag this mortar wall on top of it, and it like completely overwrites it, right? I don't see any of that blue anymore, right? So if I just wanted like parts of this to be made of mortar, I can right-click on mortar wall and add a black mask. And so now I don't see the mortar wall anymore, but I can color on my mask, and when I do, I'm going to erase, or I'm going to reveal parts of that mortar underneath it, right? And so now I can bring that out, right? Now, of course, this brush looks like MS Paint, like bubble brush, right? That doesn't have very much appeal to it. Oh, sorry, edit, redo. So we have other brushes in here we can play with as well. So I can go to my brushes. I have like a brush like this, which is going to, that one doesn't work. Oh. There we go. And I can start erasing little bits at a time of my mortar underneath there, right? Or I can use this thing here, this hatching, and you can start seeing the mortar coming through in there as well. Right? So what I'm doing is I'm revealing parts of the material with this brush. Dark speckles here. So I'm revealing parts of this mortar through this blue paint, right? And you'll see that when I'm painting, I'm getting not only my color, I'm getting specular, I'm getting the bump, I'm getting the normal, I'm getting all of that stuff, right? So I mean, you can do a lot of manual painting to get whatever results you want. Again, you can adjust your brush size, get like a little bit of a rougher, like dilapidated look here, right? So all of this is, a separate layer. I can still turn down the transparency of that layer if I wanted to get just a little bit of it. And I can set this to like multiply for whatever that's worth. Like it's going to give us a little bit of interesting look to that, right? So all of these are different effects that I can have. And if you're comfortable in Photoshop, you can start coming up with some pretty neat things here. I'm going to go ahead and wipe all that out. So, actually, wait, before I do that, I want to show you, like we're getting an okay result, but you'll see some areas of this are still very faceted and not like doing the best in the world. Something that's a good idea before you even get started is to go to this texture set settings and scroll down to the bottom and click this bake mesh maps. And I'm going to go ahead and set that up to 2048 and hit bake blend 1 mesh maps. And just in general, this usually makes your materials look better. I'm not sure if we'll see a noticeable difference in this. We saw a little bit of detail increase right in here. And so this is something you can do. Basically, it's just creating our maps for us, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my layers. I'm going to delete those two. I'm going to show you ways of making a more intuitive material, right? So I'm going to start with my regular materials, right? And let's do a plastic mat on the body of the object, right? So I drag this plastic mat on there, and again, it gives me this on the entire object. So that's not necessarily what I want. I just want it on the like center cabin part. I don't want it on the little wings. I don't want it on the nose. I just want it on that blue part, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make a mask again, the way we did earlier. Right click, add black mask. Right? And so now anything that I paint will start to reveal that. And I can little bits at a time uncover all of this blue on this and manually do that. That would be a pain in the butt, right? That's not necessarily the right way of going about this. So right now we're in the paintbrush option. If we scale down here a little bit and go to polygon fill, what this is going to allow us to do is one polygon at a time fill that in, right? So I can do something like this and very quickly start, just making my entire area like that. But I may accidentally mess up and get it on the wings, and I don't really want that, right? In the polygon fill option, you'll notice over here in our properties, it's currently set to polygon fill, which means it's going to fill one at a time. right? And so that's not, again, that's kind of slow. We have some other options here. We have mesh fill. Mesh fill would fill the entire mesh. So if you have multiple objects in here, that might be an easier way. But all the way over here is this UV chunk fill, right? See that? So if I click there, I can then click on sections of my UVs and fill that with this material, right? So if I just click that, it's just going to fill that one UV island, right? And so now just that object is filled with this matte, plastic matte pure or whatever. Again, I can always go in here and adjust stuff about this. I want to take the roughness down and make it glossier. I want to take my metallic up. I can do all of that. I can even change my color on this to whatever color we like. I like that color. Purple's a good color. So we can do this with another material, right? Let's say I wanted a really glossy, or let's just go like all out. Let's go gold. Let's make this thing have a gold nose. Right? So I dragged gold, it overwrote everything, right? But again, I want to create a mask. So right click, add black mask. And so basically I'm just going to click on, if I go to my, right here, my polygon fill, I'm going to click on the UV shell that I want to expose that gold on. So if I'm just going to do the nose, I click the nose, and now has this gold nose, this purple base, right? The same for these little wing things here. Let's do those in, what's a good one here?
Copper.
Copper? Where's that at? Copper. So we can do copper. Let's try like, it has a pretty decent wood too. Let's make this thing look like it was made in like somebody's garage. Right? So again, add black mask. I can go in here, go in here with my polygon fill, just choose each of these sections. And now I have a kind of interesting looking piece, right? If I hold shift and right click, I can adjust the lighting on it to see how the lighting works on these different materials. Because you can kind of see that we have some reflection maps going on in here. And so we can just adjust this to see how we like that, right? And again, I can always go in here, create a new logo, and or a new layer, and I can still just manually like write whatever I want to in here, draw whatever I want to in there. I'm apparently just drawing on the roughness right now, so just drawing on the color. I can do whatever I want to. I can also use, for my base color, if I go to, I always mess this up. This part, for some reason, always is hard for me. I can create an alpha, is this how I do it, or do it with a stencil? So I can do like a little stencil here, and I can use this to sort of zoom in and paint. And it should just go on that stencil. Let me make my brush bigger. Not that big. And you can make your own stencils and import them in here as well if you want. So, take that stencil off there. How do I do that? Let's remove that. So I'm getting some pretty neat stuff here. Again, not amazing, but like still a lot of little things we can add to it, right? Now let's say I wanted to rough this up just a little bit. That's usually what everybody wants to do. Like it's a little too perfect, a little too cartoony, right? Let's say I want to put a little bit of rust in this, okay? So we have a couple of smart maps in here. And I'm just going to show this one smart materials. I'm just going to show this one because I think it's a good example. This machinery one, if I drag it in there, it's going to override everything. But this one's pretty cool because what you'll notice is that we're getting this extra wear that automatically generates in these crevices, right? It automatically generates at places where stuff meets, and you'll notice that the bottom of it is a little rougher than the top of it. It's almost like there's more wear on the lower parts. If we click on this and expand this out, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different layers with different maps on it. So I'm going to show you kind of basically how those are created, right? I'm going to go ahead and delete that machinery one. Let's say I just wanted to add a little bit of rust to the bottom part of our ship, right? So I'm going to go back to my regular materials. I'm going to add rust fine just to the top of this, right? And so it puts rust all over everything, right? And then I'm going to drag a mask on there. So what I have been doing is just adding a black mask. Instead, I can use these smart masks. So when I baked the materials, that's why we did that, is so these smart masks will work a little more effectively, right? And so for little things like, was this subtle scratches, I could drag that onto my fine rust, and you'll see that what I'm going to get is some really subtle like rust on the corners and in the edges. It's really subtle, a little bit along here, right? So I could do something like that. I'm going to undo it. I could also do, I think this one's kind of neat, cavity rust. This is where it just puts it in like any crevices, right? Like any bends or crevices. But you can always increase this, right? So if I click on this mask editor, right here, I can adjust how much of this we actually start to see. Right? So I can do a global blur, kind of softens it a little too much. I can take my texture value up. You see it makes it a little bit more scraggly in there. Texture 2 is going to extend it out a little bit more onto that. Pull my ambient occlusion back. I'm not really seeing a lot of the benefit from that. Curvature, it's really just doing it on the curvature. World space normals. So you can just start playing around with these to see how much of this you can add to it. Global balance. If I start increasing that, it's just going to get a little bit more everywhere, right? Including that wood, which doesn't necessarily make sense, but whatever. I think I can actually add, can I add a second mask on that? I cannot. But I think we can actually still paint that out if we wanted to paint off the certain areas of this. Okay. And one that I actually kind of like, let me turn that down just a little bit more. I just feel like a little too much, right? One that I kind of like is we can do like dirt that's coming up from the ground. So if I went in here to materials, like that mortar actually worked pretty well. I think there's actually some dirt in here too, though, if I'm not mistaken. Mud or something. Yeah, let's just go ahead and use that mortar wall, drag that on top, right? And then add one of these smart masks on here. There's one that is ground dirt right there, and drop that on there. You'll start to see it looks like the mud is coming up from the bottom, right? And so I can pull that back a little bit. We can start to make it look like it got a little dirty on the bottom, right? Grunge map, this is the map it's using for it, so we can also increase some of that or change some of that. So let's say we've done all of this. I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of that mortar wall one, just so this exports better and we can, well, yeah, let's go ahead and get rid of that, because I want to be able to see the wood better. Actually remove all of that. Okay, let's say this is what we got to, and we're like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want in Maya. Okay? The benefit of this is we can now plug this, like plug all of the maps that this will generate straight into Arnold, and it will work after we make some changes. So that's actually the hardest part for me, is I can never remember all of these things off of the top of my head. It's probably just because I don't do texturing all day, every day. But if we go in here and we just search Substance Painter to Arnold, it'll bring up this, it's always this first one right here, this documentation from Algorithmic. So right here, wait, it's not that first one. Maybe I just do substance to Arnold. Yeah, here we go. So it's this section here I always forget. Like, there's certain rules for how these maps come in. First things first, let's make these maps. We can save this if we want to, but what I'm going to do is go File, Export Textures, and you're going to see that it's going to automatically create all the maps that I need for this. It's going to ask me where to put them. I'll go ahead and make a folder on my desktop just so we can put them in there, and hit Export. Hit OK. And what you're going to see is it exported out all of my materials into this folder. And it separated them out the way I needed them to. I have this is my color map, and this is my height map, this is my metallic, my normal, my roughness. The interesting thing about this is like you'll see roughness has a lot of information in there, right? Like, this is how this is going to determine where to put glossy parts of my object. Now, I probably don't need all of these. In all honesty, I didn't do a lot with height. I also didn't have an emissive quality to anything, so it didn't export out an emission map. So I'm just going to mainly use these 4. But let's go in here and look at how we can make that work in Arnold. Go ahead and make my object really big. Go ahead and get me a sky dome in here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and make a new Arnold material. Assign new material, Arnold shader, AI standard surface. So it's right there. And I'm just going to kind of refer back to this to remember what to do. So the biggest thing is this raw and alpha is luminance stuff. And then there's a couple of things on my normal map. So my base color from that map is going to go into my base color into my Arnold material. So color right here, base. I'm going to go ahead and go find file. And then I just have this on my desktop, base color, open. So now you can see I have my base color, but if I were to render this, like, my rust is shiny, right? I also don't have any normals or anything on there. Everything has the same amount of gloss on it, right? So the second thing in here is our roughness. So that's how, like, the changing how much specular gloss is on this thing, right? And you'll notice that I need to set it to raw and alpha is luminance. So again, go back to my specular roughness right there, file. And instead of so I'll go ahead and find my file first. So that's going to be my roughness. So you'll see it kind of changed my specular on there. I set my color space to raw, and then under my color balance, I set alpha is luminance. And so now when I render that, it's looking a little bit better. My specular roughness isn't quite as rough. So the next thing is my metallic. So the metallic is the texture map name. That needs to go under my base metalness. And again, I set that to raw and alpha as luminance. So under metalness right here, I'm going to choose that file. There, metallic. Now, if I render this, it's not going to look right. Like, I just want you to see why you do it. Like, that doesn't feel exactly right. So let me try to rescale this so we can show you. So when I go back and make sure that my material is set to, my material is currently set to RGB. If I set that to raw, it looks a little bit better. And then when I scroll down here, alpha is luminance, we should get a better result. Still not showing that well. So. There we go. And then finally, my normal map is not showing up at all. Like, I'm not getting any of these grooves in my wood here. So that one's the one that has the most amount of settings you have to change. Right, so go ahead and click on this thing again. Stop on this. Click on them. That's going to be under geometry and bump mapping. So I'll choose file on that one. And I want to make sure I set this to tangent space normals. And then on my bump value here, I'll go back to find my file, get my normal. Now again, if I render, my normals are just going to look all messed up. Right? I have to make sure that my color space is set to raw. That will help a lot. But what's going to happen is I have to also change my tangent space normals. I need to uncheck the flip red and green channels. And what that's going to allow me to do is to basically right now areas that should be recessed are poking out. You may be not able to see that really well, but that's what's happening. So if you're in your file here, if you click this little back button here, this will go back to your input from that. It's under this Arnold node, and I'm just needing to uncheck these two. And so after I do that, sometimes I have to close Arnold and reopen it to re-render. I should be getting pretty close to the same material that I was seeing in Substance. Right? So, that was a lot. I just kind of crash coursed through the whole thing. Questions? Comments? Yes?
I have a very interesting question.
Okay.
So, I want to make my terrain for my visual animation in Houdini, and I export it as a FBX, and for some odd reason though, it's saying it doesn't have any UVs. Even when I try to put in some Maya, it doesn't look like there's any UVs in there, maybe like the substance as well.
Once you get it in there, you should be able to create UVs for it. You just do it with the way you would with any other map. So, but yeah, I can help you with that again. Any questions about Substance or any of the stuff we just went over? Comments? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and save this out. I will never texture in anything else again until they come up with something that's better than Substance. Like, it is so easy to get your materials out of this thing. I strongly encourage you to take a little bit of time and use this on your materials. And I just think you're gonna be happier with the results. So I'm gonna go and stop the video. I'll upload it. I have the previous class's version of this same video as well up on YouTube, so feel free to watch any of those. Are these videos helpful? Is anybody going back and referring to any of them? Or okay, cool. Let me go ahead and stop this, and then the rest of the class is kind of yours to do with as you wish, and I'll bounce around and help people out.